Hey everybody, it is Dak here from the Ed Boys, and today we have the Skeleton Boss Guide. This guide will talk about how to grind Vetion and Calvarion kills. Vetion is one of the 3 big wilderness bosses that recently got a much-needed rework. With these reworks, Jagex added a weaker version of each boss to the wilderness, which is why we have a Calvarion in this guide too. The 2 bosses have these same mechanics, so if you know how to fight one, then you do know how to fight the other. There's some minor differences between the 2, but not enough to make 2 separate guides or anything, which is why I've stuck them both in this video. But I will discuss the differences between these 2 when they come up in certain sections. Before we jump into the guide, if you've been enjoying these videos or just getting useful information out of the guides, be sure to like and subscribe for more content. I also stream on Twitch, which should be linked on the screen and in the description. As always, this guide will start with the recommendations for fighting Vetion. After that, we'll go over the gear setup for fighting the skeletons, followed by the general inventory that I bring with me. Then we'll discuss how to travel out to each of the bosses, followed by going over the actual fight mechanics and showing an example of each Calvarion and Vetion kill so that you can see the differences between them. Once we've gone over the fight itself, we'll talk a little bit about PKers and how you could potentially be dealing with them, and finally we'll discuss the potential loot that you could get from the wilderness skeleton bosses. Technically, the only requirement for Calvarion and Vetion is just being a member. They are weak to crush, which means you'll be using melee. I suggest having at least 70 attack, strength, and defense before going for any kills out there. If you're fighting Calvarion, then you definitely could manage it with lower, like 60 pluses. But of course, that's going to mean for a lot slower kills, as with any other boss. So if you're planning on really grinding out a lot of kills, I would push to 80 pluses on your melee stats. The higher the better. It's really straightforward. You'll be dealing with PKers occasionally, so having high defense and high magic is going to make you a little bit harder to kill, since you'll be a little bit tankier. Plus, I will toss in the 70 prayer requirement and unlocking piety. I guess technically still not a requirement, but it's going to make a very big difference in the speed of your kills. Let's talk about the gear setup you can bring to the skeletons. In general, it's a little bit more difficult to set up for wildy bosses, because you could get PK'd and lose a bunch of your gear, but these guys are pretty weak, so you don't really need to bring a ton of high tier gear to get good kills anyways. As long as you're not skulled, you're always going to keep 3 items, so just make sure that you only bring 3 expensive items, and then a bunch of filler gear that's not going to be very expensive, or even as an Iron Man could be easy to replace. So you also have the protect item prayer, which is going to save a 4th item for you. You want to be careful with your 4th item though. You might get smited or even forget to turn on that protect item. And on the note of not getting skulled, if you go to your in-game settings and you check this box for skull prevention, you won't ever accidentally skull and lose any of your valuable items. There's also an item called a Trover Parchment. This can be bought from Last Man Standing, obtained through Wilderness Slayer, or also just bought off the Grand Exchange. You can take this Trover Parchment to Purdue at Lumbridge Castle to get an untradeable item locked, adding a little bit of protection. I have posted a list of breakable items that you can add the Trover Parchment to. It does cost basically like still $1.5 million to be able to save those items, so I really don't use any Trover Parchments at this point. I just try to be safe with just my 3 expensive items. I'm going to go over each gear slot and possible gear options that you could bring, and then I'll show you the current risk that I bring with me. In your head slot, we only have a few solid options, since most of the good helms are very expensive, but they're not good enough to be one of your 3 expensive items, really. And the best option is the Helm of Nadasnot, followed by the Berserker Helm, and then the Dwarven Helm. Each of these items is pretty cheap on the Grand Exchange, but also can be purchased from an in-game shop or like an NPC, so an Iron Man can stack up on them. In your cape, the Myth's Cape is going to be best, since it has a good crush bonus, and you can just buy them from the shop in the Myths Guild for 10k a piece once you've done Dragon Slayer 2. After that, you can go for the Cape of Legends from the Legends quest. A trimmed skill cape would be still a solid call, and followed by just whichever arty cloak you have. For your necklace, you want to use the Salve Amulet, because it is very broken, and it's easy to obtain a lot of them once you've done the Haunted Mine quest. You should also enchant the Salve Amulet by using Tarn's Diary on it. To get the Diary, you have to defeat Tarn in Tarn's lair, which is incredibly easy to do. The Enchanted Salve is not a requirement, but you're basically wasting your time if you don't have it. If you don't, for any reason, the Strength Amulet is still a good option, because it is very cheap, and it does give a thick strength bonus. In your ammo slot, the only thing you need to bring is a Blessing. You could rock some Dragonstone Bolts and bring a crossbow switch for anti-PKing if you're feeling frisky, but we're discussing fighting the boss at the moment, not fighting other players. Rada's Blessing is a reward from the Korend and Kavos Diaries. It's a good choice because you can get a bunch of them for free. The Rada's Blessing 4 has a +2 prayer bonus, while the others are just a +1, and from there you could go with a Peaceful Blessing. In your weapon slot, you want to use a Crush weapon, since they are weak to Crush. The Ursine Chain Mace is insane. This weapon cranks, and it is very fun to use. It is the upgrade version of the Vigora's Chain Mace, which does give it some increased stats and a special attack, which is nice. The special attack does damage over time, and if you use it on like a PKer, that PKer or any other player, they won't be able to run for a little while, so it could be used to try to escape a PKer. The Vigora's Chain Mace is still very solid for second best, but it's not that expensive to upgrade to the Ursine. Either Chain Mace is going to require using Revenant Ether. 1 Ether is used for every attack, but you need to put 1,000 Ether in the weapon to even activate it. So if you add 1,500 charges charges to an uncharged chain mace. It'll have 500 charges in it, but then if you use 500 attacks and you have 0 charges left, it'll still have that base 1000 ether. You only lose that if you get PK'd. You can still use an uncharged mace to attack, but the charged version of it is going to have 50% increased damage and accuracy against NPCs in the wilderness. The Inquisitor's Mace is technically your best option outside of the chain maces, but it's also very expensive. Then you have the Abyssal Bludgeon, which is actually very filthy here still, followed by the Zami Hasta, the Sarachnis Cudgel. Then you have a Leaf-Bladed Battle Axe. It's probably the lowest I would go. Maybe the Dragon Mace could still be done. Those last 3 weapons are also cheap enough that you could consider risking them too, but I will be showing my risk setup after we get through this section. In your shield slot, the Avernic Defender is best in slot, and it's one of my choices for my 3 expensive items. The Dragon Defender is still second best in slot, and you can use a Trowver Parchment on either defender to help yourself from losing it, but losing that Trowver Parchment lock is still an extra like 1.5 mil, so I really prefer to just have my Defender as one of my protected items. If you decide to not use a Defender, a Book of War, the Bandos book, is a very good option since you can just go grab more books for free from the Lighthouse. In your chest and leg slots, you usually have a lot of options, but I prefer to keep these as some of the cheaper items. Black D'hide is a good option to help tanking from PKers. Proselyte's not bad because it gives prayer bonus, and then Initiate is just a weaker version of Proselyte. I have leaned towards the prayer bonus more in the past when I don't really need to. Black D'hide really is the best in slot option though. In your glove slot, the Barrow's Gloves are the highest tier you want to go for. I didn't bring the Barrow's Gloves as one of my 3 expensive items, so that it is going to be like an extra 100k, 130k risk. For that reason, I will use Rune Gloves if I've seen like a lot of PKers that night, or maybe the first trip or 2, like I banked some decent loot and now I could start bringing some Barrow's Gloves. Dragon Gloves do exist between Rune and Barrows, but if you're going to make the jump from Rune, you might as well just go to Barrow's Gloves. If you haven't done any recipe for disaster stuff, you could use the Combat Bracelet. For your boots, I max out at Dragon Boots, but I play this similar to the glove situation. First trip or 2 in the day, I'll usually start with Rune Boots, or if I get PK'd for like a couple pairs of Dragon Boots, I'll go back down to those runes. It really depends if you're trying to add that 100k risk or not for extra DPS. The Climbing Boots are a reasonable low tier choice, and they are very cheap if you don't have the Rune or Dragon Boots. Finally, in the ring slot, I go for the Imbued Berserker Ring. I've messed around with the Light Bearer a little bit. It's really not worth it over the strength boost of the Berserker Ring. If you don't want to use your ring slot as one of your expensive items, you could always just bring an Explorer's Ring for some prayer bonus. So here is a look at the risk if I was bringing the Rune Boots and the Rune Gloves. Currently, I'm only risking 193k. Plus a couple 100k in charges in the Ursine Chain Mace that I would lose from Ether. Also, if I were protecting item, it would keep the Helm of Nadasnot right now, but that's really not that much. And if I instead do the Barrow's Gloves and the Dragon Boots, we're still at under a 400k risk, again, plus a couple 100k in Ether, so maybe like 600k risk when I'm pushing it there. But that includes all of the supplies that I bring with me too, so let's go ahead and move on to the inventory section. At the top of the inventory, I have 2 Divine Super Combats. You could just bring 1 if you don't think that you're going to have long trips like early on. I don't always go through a full Super Combat, but I have enough times gone through it that it's nice to have a second one. Regular Super Combats would get the job done for sure. If you look a little bit further down, I have 2 Ceradomin Brews and a Stamina Pot squeezed in here. This is mostly to help out for if a PKer does show up. It could also be used during the boss fight though. You can fight Vetion without ever needing any stamina potions, but if you find yourself running more than you had to, then you might run out of energy. I do have my looting bag down here. You can put anything in the looting bag when you're in the wilderness, but you can't take it out until you get in the bank. Also, if you get PK'd, anything that you put in the looting bag will get dropped. So if you get like the Voidwaker Blade, don't put it into your looting bag. That way, if you get PK'd while you have the expensive item, at least you lose like your Berserker Ring maybe instead of the Voidwaker Blade drop you just got. The Royal Seed Pod is my teleport out. It's a good one-click teleport that works up to level 30 Wilderness, but an Amulet of Glory can also teleport you out at level 30 if you don't have Monkey Madness 2 done yet. I like to bring Bones to Peaches tabs. You do kill some skeletal hellhounds during the fight, so you get a lot of bone drops per kill, and that can add a ton of extra food. And then everything else in the inventory is Blighted Anglerfish and Blighted Super Restores. The Blighted versions are they're only usable in the Wilderness, and they tend to be a little bit cheaper, so you might as well use them. Your ratio of food and potions could change up as you do more trips, or depending on if you're doing Calvarion or Vetion. You can take 0 damage from either of them, but if you mess up Vetion, he is going to hit harder, so maybe you need to lean more food. Just in general, you're going to want to adjust as you make more trips. If you keep coming back with a bunch of food and no potions, or vice versa, you just got to adjust the inventory a little bit. If you have any questions about the gear and inventory setup, let me know in the comments section below, and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Alright, let's talk about traveling to the skeleton bosses. This is one section that there's a clear difference between the two of them because they're not located in the same cave, so I will start with Calvarion. You can use a dueling ring to travel to the Ferox Enclave. There's a pool at the Enclave that'll heal you up. There's also a bank, and it is very close to Calvarion's cave, so you can do all of your traveling through the Ferox Enclave. If the run from here really isn't close enough for you, you could teleport to the Corp lair with a games necklace and just run from there. This does require another Invy space, whether it's for the games necklace or like a house teleport if you're using the jewelry box, and it's not that much faster than running from the Enclave, so I just use the Ferox Enclave for Calvarion. Vetion can also be accessed by running from the Enclave, but it is further than Calvarion, so there's a couple of options to knock off time on the run. Again, you could use the games necklace to teleport to the Corp lair, but also the Revenant Caves teleport is a very solid travel option. The teleport is a scroll that you can get as a drop from Revenants, but it also can be bought off the GE for very little cash at the moment. I default to just running from the Enclave very often. It's not really far, and it does save up some inventory space and supplies. Generally, you have pretty long trips at the boss, so your bank trips taking you a little longer is not like a huge deal. Alright, let's talk about how to actually fight these skeletons. I'm going to go over the mechanics and like the example fight first with Calvarion, and then I'm going to show you a Vetion kill so that you can see that they're pretty much the same, just Vetion's a lot stronger. First of all, let's talk about the fee to get into the room. It does cost 50k to get into the boss lair, which can be taken directly from your bank, so you don't have to bring it with you. You also don't have to pay 50k every time you enter. You only have to pay another 50k if you die in the wilderness. So if you pay 50k, you have a good trip, and then you go bank and come back, you're not going to pay the money again. But if you died while you're out there, the next time you go back, you will have to pay the fee. Though each time you successfully kill one of the bosses, your next fee does go down by 10k. So if you pay the fee and then you kill the boss 5 times, then you get PK'd, you actually don't have to pay the fee the next time either. So for the most part, you really will forget about your fee pretty quickly with this grind. This is arguably the easiest of the 3 wilderness boss fights that just got their reworks. It's also the most click intensive since you have to be moving like every Calvarion attack. Calvarion will start in his purple form and will be roaming around the room when you arrive. The main attack that he uses is a lightning attack. You're going to see shadows on the ground where the bolts are going to hit, and you just have to move out of the way. They do hit a 3x3 area, so you don't want to stand next to them either, though they will do significantly less damage if you're only 1 tile off, as opposed to just tanking the lightning head on. Calvarion will also spawn a lightning bolt within 1 square of where you're standing every time he does an attack, so you have to move every time he does the attack. Like, he will always target you with one of them. It's just a bunch of back and forth action, though. The rhythm of this becomes very easy very quickly. The other main attack he can use is a shield bash. You're going to see a large area close to him covered in shadows. He'll say something like dodge this, and then you only have a couple of ticks to get out of there. Being under Vetion is also dangerous during this attack. Even though you won't see a shadow under him, you will get hit, so run away, not under. If you do get hit by the shield, then you're going to take like 40 damage, and you won't be able to attack for like 5 seconds. So you might as well just heal up if you do get hit by the shield. You don't have to rush to get another attack in. Since both of his main attacks are dodged just by moving, once you get a rhythm of just running back between hits, it really does become kind of brain dead. And it's really not the worst thing in the world to get hit by an attack here. It's nice that you can avoid all of the damage, but sometimes you do take damage if you mess up, and that's really not that big of a deal. When Calvarion reaches half health or less, his next attack will spawn 2 skeletal hellhounds in the room. Protect from melee and KO both of these hounds, as he is invincible while they are out. This is the only time that you have to use Protect from melee at all, but you'll notice that I often just can't Protect from melee the whole fight, because if I don't, I forget to flick it on real quick for the hounds and usually take a little bit of extra damage. Once you knock out the hounds, his next attack is going to say something like, you'll pay for what you did, or do I have to do everything myself around here? And then he won't be invincible anymore. You have to wait until he says like whichever phrase he goes for after the hellhounds have been KO'd. When you get the purple Calvarion down to 0 health, he is going to send off 1 more special attack while changing phases. He's going to spawn sort of like a diamond of lightning strikes that you need to avoid. Standing under him while he changes phases will always be safe, but also just running away from the lightning will avoid the damage. At this point, you just do the fight again. He's going to have the same main attacks. At 50% health, you'll get a little bit stronger hellhounds this time, but still just protect from melee and KO them. And once you get this phase to 0 health, then you will get your loot. Now that we've gone over the mechanics, let's watch a full fight, but with Vetion this time. I am also going to be uploading some full hour examples of these skeleton bosses. They won't be out for a little bit, so let's go ahead and dive into one of these examples though. Like I have been saying, you will notice that all of the mechanics during this fight are the same as the Calvarion fight. Basically, I'm just looking to step back every time I see the lightning or that shield bash attack that he started off with pretty early. 255 health per phase is a bit of a jump from 150. So the fight will be a little longer. And then these hellhounds that you have, the skeletal hellhounds. The skeletal hellhounds have the same amount of health as like Calvarion skeletal hellhounds. Actually, any phase, like Orange or purple Vetion, orange or purple Calvarion. It'll always spawn 30 health Hellhounds. Almost didn't get out of the way of that one. Run under him during the phase change. The greater Hellhounds that the orange Vetion / Calvarion spawns will be stronger, but if you're protecting from melee, that doesn't matter. Yeah, as you can see, 99% of the fight really is just stepping away as Vetion uses an attack because it is going to spawn lightning at your feet, or at least very close to you. And then even if it does hit you, it's not that big of a deal. Like right there, I got sniped for really only a 2 and still got out of that trap. Could have been like 8 to 10 damage, which is like 1, maybe 2 sets of bones that we just got from those skeletal hellhounds. Yeah, and then we're almost done with the fight. Now, the Ursine Chain Mace makes the fight a lot faster there, but even with a weaker weapon, Vetion is overall, he's pretty weak. He's got low defense, so the fight doesn't take that long. Here's something that's unique to Vetion over Calvarion. When you leave Vetion's lair, you won't just go outside where you entered, you'll be sent to the escape caves. These caves have a bunch of low-level spiders and bears, so you are constantly going to be getting hit, and you'll be placed at one of 3 random spots in the cave when you first enter there. From there, there's 4 different exits that you could take, which is going to take you back out to the wilderness. It seems kind of confusing. You're only in the caves for like 5 seconds every once in a while, so long story short, when you leave Vetion, you'll be in this small cave system, and you just have to find one of the exits, which you can usually see like 2 or 3 of them at the same time. It's a pretty small cave system. So both of the fights are pretty much the same, but Vetion does have more health. Vetion's still very soloable, especially if you use a chain mace, so you kind of have a choice for which one you want to fight if you are soloing. If you're going in a group, clearly you have to do Vetion. Solo Vetion instead of Calvarion is a little bit more risky since you're higher level wilderness and you're in the multi-combat zone still, so you're likely to see a full team instead of just one PKer, and you have to deal with the escape caves a little bit. If you haven't done really a lot of wildy bosses, you definitely should start with Calvarion. Calvarion is under level 30 wilderness in his lair, so you can teleport out immediately with the Royal Seed Pod or like an Amulet of Glory. I like the Vetion fight a lot. It's very easy to do, and he has thick loot, which we'll be getting into in a little bit. So I do suggest trying the solo Vetion occasionally if you've been succeeding at some Calvarion kills. Both bosses are viable to grind for solo gains, though. Let's briefly talk about PKers. I do plan on making this topic like its own separate video because we are going to go over a lot of things, or we could go over a lot of things in this topic. This guy's already getting pretty long, and I would be repeating a lot of these things if I put this exact section in each of my wildy boss guides, so it'll be kind of brief. The main piece of advice that I have for PKers is actually more about your mindset, not like your gameplay or your ability to escape or anything like that. As long as you're not risking that much money, the only thing that really is a problem with PKers is like the amount of time that it wastes on your end. Obviously, it's more convenient to never get PK'd and lose money, but the drops from the wildy bosses make up for that very easily. I've done thousands of wildy boss kills. I've probably been PK'd dozens, if not like 100+ times at this point, so it's a little bit easier for me to just kind of be over it. But at the very least, if you go in there with the mindset that like getting PK'd is not that big of a deal, it will happen sometimes, and when it does, just put on your gear and go back out there, then this grind is actually pretty much a joke. It's a very easy money to make, just sometimes it's annoying. But the only thing that makes it annoying is you being annoyed by the PKers. Like, as long as you know sometimes you are going to get PK and you just accept that, it's going to be a lot more fun out there. On that note, you can still try to avoid getting PK'd though. You don't have to let them kill you. Paying attention is really the biggest thing. You can see the PKer drop into the room. So if you're in Calvarion, you can teleport out before they teleblock you. If you're in Vetion, it's kind of beneficial to stay near the exit as much as you can. That way you could potentially get out of there before they land a freeze or a teleblock. If you do have an alt account, you can camp outside to potentially give yourself a warning for incoming PKers. Make sure that you bank your loot fairly often, or at least if you get a lot of money, that's going to help you bank some cash and you end up risking less and still profiting well in the day. I don't think I brought the Din's Bulwark up for the gear or the inventory at all. I don't really bother with the Din's Bulwark because it counts as one of your expensive items at that point. It's pretty pricey, but it can help you tank a lot more PKers if you're not trying to risk anything and you want to make sure you get out every time. There's still no guarantees though. If you do find yourself getting attacked though, don't give up. I mean, like I said, it's not that big of a deal if you do get PK'd, but you'd be surprised how many PKers are just not very good at it, and you might be able to get away and save yourself a little bit of cash. So if you do get PK'd, just realize, you know, it's not too bad, but if you don't get PK'd, that's a bonus. Like, it's all just uphill from there. If you're interested in a longer discussion video about how to avoid or get away from PKers, let me know in the comments section below. Like I said, that is an idea on the list for my upcoming discussion video, but I was planning on finishing all of these wilderness boss guides before I got into that discussion vid. Alright, let's finally get into the best part of the bossing life, the loot. The skeletons each drop like the same items, but the Calvarion drops are much smaller quantities, and the unique drops are a lot more rare. Vetion drops are very thick overall, but that's also because you can fight Vetion with a group of players. If multiple players kill Vetion, they don't each get like a full Vetion drop. For example, a solo Vetion drop of Sanfu serums is going to be 20 Sanfus. If 2 players kill Vetion, they're both going to get their own drop. It could be any drop, it doesn't always have to be the same. If they both did roll Sanfu serums, they're not going to both get 20. Rather, they'd both get like about 10, depending on how much damage they did. If one guy did more damage, he would get a few more. Again, you don't always get the same drop as everyone else. You all get your own roll, but you only get a fraction of what the loot would be based on how much damage you did to Vetion. But in a solo Vetion, it always results in the maximum amount of whichever drop you get, which leaves the question, what about when you get a Voidwaker blade or a dragon pickaxe? Can 2 players get a Voidwaker piece in 1 kill? The answer is no. It will only roll the unique table 1 time every kill, so you can only get one of these items on a single kill, and then everything else is just giving each player their own roll at regular loot. So I had to rewrite this part of the loot section because the price of the Voidwaker has been a bit fickle lately, and just taking a few extra days to edit this has seen a big difference in the Voidwaker price. When I originally was scripting this video, it was sitting at about 27 mil, the Voidwaker blade, and it was slowly on its way down. While editing the video, I saw it up to 35 mil at one point, and at this moment it's at 30 mil as I record this. So the Voidwaker price is bouncing around a lot, and that is going to make up for about 40% of the loot at Vetion. To be fair, that means 60% of the GP is not based off of just getting that one big drop, but your overall GP an hour is still going to be affected very heavily by the Voidwaker blade. At the moment, the OSRS wiki has an average Calvarion kill sitting at 88k GP per kill, and killing Vetion will give you 165k GP per kill. The kills that you can get per hour is going to vary depending on your gear, your stats, and then things like how many PKers that you see during the hour, if you see any. It's possible to kill like 50 Calvarions in an hour, but that's definitely hopeful thinking. I would say 40 kills is a reasonable max, and then if you're wearing minimum gear and you have minimum stats, more like 15 to 20 kills per hour. With Vetion, you're looking at more like 30 kills an hour being possible, but maybe 25 being the more reasonable fast pace, and then 10 to 15 kills an hour being the norm for lower tier gear, or if you see like way too many PKers and you're hopping worlds all the time. That would put Calvarion at about 1.3 to 3.5 GP an hour in loot, and then Vetion 2.4 to 4.1 GP an hour in loot. These numbers, of course, are going to vary a lot more than bosses that are not in the wilderness, and that is just the loot. Your profit is going to involve subtracting the amount of money that you have spent on supplies. What I can say about Vetion and Calvarion grind, just the wildy bosses in general, I should say, since the update, I streamed a couple of dozen like wildy boss nights, and every time we end up in the same conversation where basically I'm just ranting about like the wildy bosses were already pretty good money before this update, and they have now upgraded that GP per hour by adding the Voidwaker pieces, which is definitely a good thing. This is a good rant that I get into. Overall, I have found the wildy boss loot is very solid and very consistent overall, which really should be the case for a high-risk boss like a wilderness boss. And not only am I making good money each time that I go grind more Vetion life, but there's also a very cool pet. The pet drop rate from Vetion is a 1 in 2,000, but the pet drop rate from Calvarion is a 1 in 2,800. With the kills being a lot faster at Calvarion, it is much better for pet hunters to fight Calvarion instead of Vetion when they're just looking for the pet, but they also won't get quite as much money during the grind. Vetion pet is one of my favorites in the game, so I mostly grind out skeletons just trying to get that pet, but I do like the bonus loot of Vetion solos a little bit more than I like Calvarion. Even in the case of pet hunting, I kind of like to do Vetion a little better. It is definitely less hours on average to get the pet from Calvarion, though. I think that is everything I wanted to talk about in this Vetion and Calvarion guide, everybody. I know it was a pretty lengthy guide, but there were 2 different bosses, and there's the PKing aspect in the wilderness, so it makes for a much longer discussion. If you still have any questions about the bosses, be sure to let me know in the comments section below, and I will get back to you as soon as possible. I normally do upload a full hour of fighting the bosses to give more examples of the fight outside of just the guide, and I will be uploading the full hour of Vetion and Calvarion, but it's going to be a few weeks after I finish up these wildy boss guides. There's going to be a few like hour of videos that get released during all 1 week in May while I am gone. Once those full hour videos are uploaded, though, they will be linked in the description. Thank you very much for watching, everybody. If you enjoyed the video or you just got some useful information out of it, be sure to like and subscribe for more content. I also stream on Twitch, which should be linked on the screen and in the description. I am also on Twitter, and I have a Discord, which should be linked in the description. Thanks again for watching, and best of luck on your skeleton grinds.